This session today is going to be about Microsoft Flow rather than Power Apps, but as part of it, I'll demo how to integrate a flow into a Power App that you create, since this is the Power Apps user group. But they're very tightly related with each other, and Microsoft's sort of tagline for Flow is to work less and do more, meaning that it's a way of automating business processes using workflows. But it's more than that, and you'll see why. So this is just a little bit of contact information about me, and I can get with Andy later on how to go about sharing my slides, because at the end I've got a reference slide with some resource links and things like that too. So it'll be, and with screenshots and so on, so it'll be helpful to have the slides later on, perhaps. And I had been describing to the group my background a little bit, that I come from a business and manufacturing background where we had used Sharepoint, and then after that business folded, I got into just doing SharePoint, so that's really the angle that I'm coming at. All of the Office 365 things from is via SharePoint. So Flow is, as I said, is a workflow service. And by the way, if you have any questions, you could put them in the chat. I won't be able to see it while I'm in my slide deck, but Andy can maybe see the questions, and then at the end we can do any sort of Q&A verbally if you want to, or if somebody can pipe up and tell me if they have a question as we go along. That's fine. That's great. We're going to have some slides and then go into demos is my agenda. So first of all, Flow is based on connections to various services, and they're the exact same service connections that Power Apps uses. So there are, as of the time I took this screenshot the other day, 121 different services that you can connect to, so there are a lot. Access is not one of them, and I realize it's the Access user group, but so I don't know whether that's on the roadmap to connect to Access Online, for example, because really these are all online data sources. Although you can also connect to on-premises data using, they've got this thing called on-premises data gateway, but currently the only connections for that are an on-premises SQL database or an on-premises SharePoint environment, although I think they're planning to expand that. I'm not Microsoft MVP, so I don't get in on the, all of the information of the upcoming things, but I believe I did hear somebody say that. And then the other thing that you can connect to is this relatively new thing called the Common Data Service, and I think maybe Andy had talked about that in one of the prior meetings. I don't recall exactly, but that was a whole topic unto itself.
Yeah, and just to chime in May we're going to be doing a presentation on CDS. It used to be called CDM, but Common Data Model, but they changed it to Services, and so next month's meeting will be on that.
Oh, cool. Oh, great. Okay, perfect. And note that some of the services are labeled as premium services. For example, CDS is one of those, and Salesforce is one. I think those are things where you have to buy a little bit additional license to be able to have access to those. But there are a lot of your really basic and important connections that you can get for free. And every flow begins with a trigger of some kind. So you've got sort of these building blocks. You've got your connections, and then you have some kind of trigger that triggers the flow. So when you're creating a new flow, what the screenshot on this slide is showing is that you begin at the trigger step, and you can have access to any of the services available, and it shows you what all triggers are available for those services. So you can search for the services, like if you know you want to do something with Dropbox, like when a file is added to Dropbox or something, you could type in Dropbox in the search window, and then it'll show you just the triggers that have to do with Dropbox. So some other examples are shown on the left there. For example, a trigger might be when a new item is created in a SharePoint list, or you have actual flow buttons that you can add to your phone. And so that could be a trigger. And then one that we're going to look at later is triggering a flow via a button on a Power App. And once you have a trigger in place, then the flow performs various actions. It can be anywhere from one action to quite a multitude of actions, just whatever your business use case is. And the screenshot shows how that looks in the flow diagram page. You'll see when we do the demo, it's really intuitive, I think, the way that you can build flows. It's all very graphical and kind of point and click kinds of choices for you. So in this case, to perform an action, again, you get the same sort of list of services that you can search, and in this case it would show you any actions that are available for that service. And they are constantly adding new triggers and actions and services to Microsoft is adding, that is. And it's also actually possible to create your own if you're a developer, which I am not, so I haven't really looked into that at all, but there are possibilities to be able to do that. So some examples might be, based on whatever that trigger was that happened, you might want to create a new SharePoint item, like we have a demo that I'll look at where if the trigger is somebody posts a tweet about some particular topic where it's got a certain hashtag, like for an event that you're attending, and then based on that trigger, I'm going to perform an action, which is to create an item in a SharePoint list that I have set up to hold those tweets, and then I can do more with that later is the idea. Another example of an action might be to send a mobile notification. For example, there's a template available where you can get a notification when you get an email from a certain person, because that's something you really want to know about, like from your boss, for example. And so there are all kinds of different actions available. And in the actions, you can use values from other steps prior to that. So in this screenshot example, this was saving tweets from the Sharepoint Saturday Caribbean that I spoke at. And so my trigger there was when a new tweet appears, and then I put in the search text was SPS Caribbean because that was our hashtag for the event. Then the action is to create an item, and you can see in the little icon there next to create item that this is a SharePoint. That's the SharePoint icon. So it's going to create an item in a SharePoint list was what I chose to do. And I have to tell it where the list is and what it's called in SharePoint, but then I can take it fills in the it gives me the fields that I have in my SharePoint list, and I can choose values that are coming from the tweet, and we'll see that in the demo how that works, but it's all dynamic values, so it's really quite cool. And if you have prior steps to that, then so for example, once it creates this item, if I had another action after that, I could access values from either the tweet or the SharePoint list. So you can get to values from any prior step. And then you can also add conditions to add logic to your flow. That one that I just showed had no logic to it because it was just a if this then, or well actually it was just a trigger then an action. But you can also add a condition. So in this screenshot, just showing kind of the basic framework of a condition, you would have the flow look at some object name and check equal to, or they could have contains or not equal to or greater than or whatever, and then some value. And then you have a if yes and a if no condition sides. So the template for it, or the framework for it, is that nothing would happen in either case, but so then you go ahead and either add an action, or if you click on the more, then you get all these other kinds of things you can add rather than just an action. And so I could add another condition, so I could have nested conditions. I can add a switch case. Well, let me just show you this next screen. So here I've expanded some of those. So I had my first condition there, and again, these are just blank, but and then on the yes side, if yes, then I'm telling it I want to have a switch, a case switch. So in this case, then you get to put, you've got case 1, and then you add another case using this plus symbol, and you get case 2, and I don't know if there's a limit to that. Actually, I didn't try that, but however many cases you need. And then within that case, so in other words, if this switch on some particular value equals whatever, like case A, case B, case C, then you could put whatever kind of actions you want here. Just as an example, I put a do until just to show that that's one of the sorts of looping that you can do, until a value is equal to something else, or another type of looping is an apply to each. So in case B, that some loop happens because it's a list of items, for example, and so you need to apply this same, what you're about to say, the actions you're about to add need to be applied to each item. So you might use that like to populate sort of an array of something from a list or something like that. So the samples we're going to look at are going to be pretty simple, but I just wanted to show you that those kinds of things are available to you. So and some of that is new since the last time I presented about flow. Like the case switch wasn't there before, and I don't think the do until was there before. So again, they keep on adding more and more features. So the idea is to have this be able to replace, for example, SharePoint Designer workflows, which would normally be what you would use for SharePoint workflows, but this is actually far more powerful because you can access all those different services. It isn't just SharePoint like the SharePoint Designer workflows are. This slide is just showing how you could create a flow based on something in SharePoint, which is what I'm going to use for my demo just because that's where I come from, but the same things apply basically to any types of flows, except for SharePoint kind of has a special relationship with Microsoft Flow in that when and I don't know how many of you are in the SharePoint space, but if you have a SharePoint custom list or a document library, relatively recently, especially for the document libraries, you actually get an item at the top of the list or library that lets you add a flow, and it will automatically then connect to that library, that list or library, which makes it easy to make one pretty automatically. Or if you're also, this gives another example, whatever service, whether it's SharePoint or whatever, you can search for that service in the triggers and actions to begin creating a flow. And then just kind of really overview of how you go about using a flow in a Power App. If you're in Power Apps, either on the web or in the client app, you can click on flows in the menu, and it'll show you any flows that are related to Power Apps, as opposed to all of your flows that may be doing all kinds of other things. But if you want to actually add a flow to a Power App, you must be using the Power App Studio desktop app to be able to add a flow. And I don't know if that's on the roadmap to add that in the web version, which is a little bit lighter in a couple different ways. But right now you have to be using the desktop app to add a flow to a Power App. And I'll show you how to do that. And also, there are tons and tons, hundreds. The last time I actually counted, there were 500, and that was several months ago, and it's pointless to try to count them. But these are templates for flows that either have been created by Microsoft. You can see in the screenshot that these ones on the top were created by Microsoft. But you can also submit templates to the template gallery. So there are lots there that are created by other people. If there's something that seems like they would be useful to other people. So I would normally suggest that if you have in mind something that you would like to do with a flow, to at least have a look through the templates, and because you can search through there, you can look in all the different kinds of flow categories and see if something applies to what you're trying to do. Or you could search by what services you're trying to connect, or just something about weather, for example. I see that's the very most popular template, which seems a little silly to me because you can get that through all kinds of different ways. But anyway, if a template already exists, then that would be the easiest way to create a new flow. You can just expand on it and modify it for yourself. And then also I'll show you how you can manage the flows that you've created and see when they ran and what happened when they ran, and if there was a problem you can troubleshoot and things like that. So we'll take a look at that too in the demo. And I also just wanted to point out that there is an admin center for Flow, which I think maybe Andy talked before about the admin center for Power Apps, and it's exactly the same thing, really. In these screenshots it says Flow at the top only because I was in Flow and I clicked on admin center, but if you're in Power Apps and you click on it, you get the exact same thing, and all the settings carry over from one to the other. So there's really no difference, but you can create different environments, like you could have a test environment and a production environment, for example, and you can create data policies having to do with, that you don't want to allow people to create flows which connect confidential business data sources to Twitter, for example. And then this slide is just showing the current pricing. Oh, I meant to change that date on there. That's still the current pricing as of when I just checked it the other day too. So there is a free flow, which you get fewer flow runs per month, and it only checks every 15 minutes. And then as you go up in price per user per month, you get more flows and more frequent checks for, if something changed and so on. So I noticed, just as an aside, I always started using Flow with the preview when it came out, and so I noticed that now they've kind of automatically put me into I'm not sure how many day trial of the Flow plan too. So at some point before that runs out in the next 40 days, I need to get them to switch back over to one of the other ones. And then these are just some resources before we go into the demo. Anybody can try Flow, your mother or anybody, by going to flow.microsoft.com. And as I said, you can connect to tons and tons of different services. All you need to have is logins for whatever the services are. And then another, on the Flow website, besides being able to create flows, there is learning resources. So if you click on the Learn up at the top, there's, for example, this guided learning, which are a series of short little videos about doing different things, getting started with Flow and doing specific actions. And then that's also where the documentation is, and their blog, and so on. So the blog is a really good thing to keep up with if you're looking for things that they've changed and updated, because every time they add a new feature, they put out a blog post about it, so that's very useful. And then another place to go, and this is for both Flow and Power Apps, is the powerusers.microsoft.com. This screenshot at the bottom is from the Power Users community, and there are communities for Power BI, Power Apps, Flow, and that's the video one. I forget what it's called now, and I cut it off. So you can go there, and there are forums and blog posts by community members as opposed to by Microsoft, and lots of good information there. In fact, I was having a problem yesterday and was able to find the answer in the community forums. So it's quite helpful. And you can also check my blog, which is at sandyu.com. I have a post that is just resources about Microsoft Flow, and I've got another one that's just resources about Power Apps. So it's got links to different general resources, and then I also have a Twitter list for those who are on Twitter of Power Apps and Flow people who are on Twitter, so that might be a list to follow. And I have a walkthrough of the tweet flow that I'm going to demo, and I will be putting up a walkthrough of the other one, the vacation booking that I'm going to demo too. And I just wanted to point out there's a webinar tomorrow from the Microsoft Flow group about this new approvals feature that they've just added within the last couple of days. I don't have it quite yet in my tenant, and I'm on first release, but they said by the end of the week all the first release tenants will have it, but it's a new type of approval system, like more streamlined approvals. We're going to look at an approval workflow, but apparently the new one is even better. Slides. Does anybody have any questions, or have there been some that come in that I can help with at this point before I go into my demos?
So are all of the flows that exist, are they all free, or are there any of those that you have to pay for?
The templates?
Yes.
I have not noticed that any of the templates said that you had to pay for them, but it could be that some of the templates access services which come at a premium.
Okay, gotcha.
So for example, if we go to, well, that was actually the next thing I was going to look at was, so here's the live list of the supported services, and so you can see, for example, Salesforce says it's premium. If I click on it, then I can see the various templates that exist having to do with Salesforce. And yeah, I can see that the templates themselves don't say you have to pay for them, but you would have to pay to be able to use the Salesforce API.
Okay.
If that
and what time is your webinar tomorrow?
It's not mine, but it's the Microsoft Flow.
Oh, gotcha. It's theirs.
Right. It's sorry, yeah, I didn't say that. It's at 1 o'clock.
1 Eastern.
I'm pretty sure. Yes, Eastern. Yeah.
Okay.
Because theirs are normally 10 a.m. Pacific.
Gotcha.
And if you go to that link that I have in my on my slide there, so they're using YouTube lately for their webinars, and the Power Apps group also does webinars like once a week or every other week, something like that. So they have another one coming up on Tuesday, just FYI, same time and station, and that one's going to be on Power Apps controls. But they're very good. Normally, they're actually the people on the Flow and Power Apps teams with Microsoft doing the presenting.
Okay, and I put the link in the chat window for anybody interested.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks. Okay, so what I wanted to show then is, and this is good timing, I've got halfway done. So we can see the services that there are, and then so these are in semi-alphabetic order. They've got the kind of most common ones at the top down through Dropbox, and then from that point on they're in alphabetic order, in case you were wondering, because it took me a little while to figure that out. Then you can also look at templates. So if you're looking for a sample of a flow that does something like what you want to do, this is showing all the flows, but you can look at the different categories in that drop-down, or up at the top here you can search the templates. Like if you know you want to do something with Dropbox, I can search for that and see all the templates that have anything to do with Dropbox. And actually, that doesn't have anything to do. They must have Dropbox in there somewhere. Save tweets to an Excel file. I don't know. But then to use it, all you need to do is, let's try this one. To use any template, you just click on it, and it'll show you the services that it's going to try to use, and it'll show you to use this template, you have to log in to whatever the services are for it. So right now, since I'm already logged into SharePoint, it is going to use that same connection, but I could switch accounts if I wanted to. And I would just need to sign into my Dropbox account to be able to get started creating this flow. And that's a point to note, though, that all of the flows and the connections are based on whatever credentials you put in your connection. I mean, this is the same for Power Apps too. So if you're doing this in a corporate environment, the best practice that I've heard most people say is you might want to have some kind of a corporate account that is the connections, because otherwise, if you rely on just the person who's who has the Twitter account or whatever, has the Office 365 login, and that person leaves, then your connection is going to break. So it might be best to use to have some kind of standard account that you use for all those types of connections that you want to be able to use throughout your organization. All right. So then if I take a look on this flow page, so this is just at flow.microsoft.com is how I got to these things. I can go to My Flows and see the flows that I've created. And on this Manage Flows screen, you can edit the flow by just clicking on it. You can see when it was last modified. You can turn it on or off. So I've got most of the older ones that I have turned off. And you can, with the information button, you can see the runs for it. So for example, in this case, I have a little flow that sends me an email with information about the Power Apps blog posts. So it's kind of basic. I could do that through an RSS feed, but the flow, with the flow, I can modify the bottom of the body of my email and make it say whatever I want it to say. So for example, if I click on the information, I can see when all it ran and that it succeeded each time. Or for example, this vacation approval that we're going to look at in a minute, if I look at the information screen on that, I can see that it failed at one point when I was doing some testing with it. And if I click through to here, I can see where it failed. So I get a green checkbox for the things that worked, and then I have this exclamation point because that's the step that didn't work, and therefore the other ones are X'd out because it never got that far. And so I can click on that to see what the problem was, which in this case had to do with my user credentials. And so then that helps really a lot for troubleshooting. If I go back here, this icon with the little people on it is relatively new, and that lets you add other owners to this flow. So when Flow first came out, a flow belonged to you, and you were the only person who could edit it. So this is new, where you can have team flows, and you can see at the top here now I have my flows versus team flows. And so I have a team flow, which was a flow I had created as my own flow, and then I had gone in and added another owner, meaning that this other user in my tenant can edit, update, and delete the flow and access the history and add other owners and things like that. So note that the flows, even if they're my flows, if they were on, for example, a SharePoint list or a SQL table or something like that, they would work for other people, but other people wouldn't be able to manually initiate them if they're the type of flow that could be done with, or the other people couldn't edit the flows or anything like that. So this creating a team flow lets you have other people contribute and edit permissions to your flow. And then the ... is just where you can delete. And then another fairly new feature is Save As, which is very nice because that lets you create, rather than having to use a public template or create a template and try and upload it into the template gallery, which I think gets vetted in some way. You can just internally save a flow as, with another name and copy it. So if you're doing something very similar with a couple different lists or tables, or in this example with my blog feeds, I created one and then did a save as to make a copy and just changed the URL that it was pointing to basically and some of the text to make it work for the other one. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so one flow that we're going to just take a look at is my tweet flow. That's this really basic one. And so if I click on that, this was for the SPTechCon event, which is the Sharepoint technical conference. And so I had previously created a Sharepoint list that was to hold the tweets. And so if you were using SQL, for example, you would have to previously create a table that would have the proper columns and things that would hold the data that you want to collect. And so then if I just expand each portion of the flow by clicking on it, I can see that I've got my search text, my hashtag in there for when the tweet appears containing that particular hashtag, and that then I want to create an item in the Sharepoint list. And this little plus sign here is something that's relatively new too since the last time I demoed Flow, and that is that you can insert a new step in the middle of something if you forgot to do something, which is pretty handy. Before, you could drag them, I think, before, but this lets you right away create one wherever you want it. Let me just make sure we're still okay here, right?
Yep.
All right. And so I just wanted to show that when you're in an action, you can how you add the variable data to it. So in this case, I'm creating my item in my Sharepoint list, so I had to name the site and the list that I was going to use, but I can, in the drop down here, get to recent sites, which may be helpful, and then once I select the sites, then it would show me the various list names. Now, I haven't actually tried this with SQL because I don't have that set up right now, but I'm guessing, though, that it would be similar where you'd connect to a database and then you could choose the table out of it, for example. And then to get the values from the tweet to put into the list, when you click into one of those areas, you get this dynamic content flyout that gives you access to all of the data that comes from that tweet. And there's actually even more than that. If I go see more, just all kinds of information about who created it, when it was created, location, all sorts of things. So you'd need to, for whatever you're creating a flow about, you'd need to kind of play with that, I guess, to see, what all data is available from that particular data source, because that too keeps getting added to the things that are available from a given data source. As Microsoft is able to add them, they do. And then if I made a change, I would update my flow, and then it would save it. So, but I'm just going to close that. And I'm going to take a look at the flow that integrates with Power Apps. So in this scenario, I've got a vacation list in Sharepoint, but again, that could be in something else. Could be in the common data service or in a database of some kind, or some other line of business application possibly. So I've got where people, the object is, I want people to be able to use their phone, use the Power App on their phone to submit a vacation request and get it approved by their manager, whoever their manager is. And so we're going to do that with a Power App and a flow. So on the flow, what you need to do to make that happen is first create the flow. Actually, I mean, first, really, what you would do is create the list. So pretend I've already done that. So I've got my list and I have my columns and things. So that actually has to happen first. Then I can create my flow because it's based on those columns. And the one that I used was, so the trigger I've used is just called Power Apps, and there's nothing to it. Like if I click on it, there are no parameters to enter or anything like that. It's just, this means that it's going to be triggered by you pressing a button in Power Apps that's connected to the flow, and then you can get information from the Power App and provide it to the flow. So it'll be the things in purple coming from Power Apps. And so what I'm going to have it do is get the user profile of a person, of the user who's creating the vacation request. The way I have it set up in my app right now is that you have to choose the user for whom the request is being made, but you could make it so that it would be whoever the current user is, but I just don't have that set up on my phone to be able to do that. And then, so I'm going to get the user profile, then I'm going to get their manager, so whoever the user was in the Office 365 users, I'm going to get their manager, which is based on who is set as their manager in Azure Active Directory in this case. And then I'm going to use Outlook to send an approval email. And this is the part where they've got this new approval system now, but this is what you can do before that. It's also pretty slick, that it would send an approval email to the email address of the manager. So when I filled this in, when I click in here, I get different the different values. So these first bunch of values are from the Get Manager step, and then looking down, then there's a bunch of values from the Get User Profile step, which is for the requesting user, all of their information. And then down below is information that's coming from Power Apps. So anything that I want to pull from Power Apps, when I am adding that, like for example when I was up here and I wanted to get the user profile of the user, I went over here and said I wanted to ask in Power Apps. And that what that does is create a field name that then is going to map to what comes out of Power Apps. So if I click on Add in Power Apps, or Ask in Power Apps rather, it comes up with another variable there, which I don't really need, but then it adds that variable to this list of, so now there's Get Manager User, which wasn't there before, and then that would be the field that I would refer to in Power Apps, which you'll see in a few minutes. So I'm going to clear that out for now, though. And then down here in the approval email, so like I was saying, then this email, it's not really clear by looking at it because they're all coming from Office 365 users icons, but this is the email of the manager, so it came from the Get Manager step. I think those, no, they're really the same. And I can create my own email subject, so I've said the email subject is going to be approval request for whoever the user is that's requesting it, their vacation, and I'm giving the manager options to either approve or reject. And this approval email is a special kind of email, which I'll show you in the demo, has these nice big approve and reject buttons, so they don't even have to go to some link or do anything to approve it. They just click a button to approve it or reject it. And then in the advanced options, I can create the body of the email. So I just used some values from the this is the user, this person's display name would like to go to wherever from whatever date to whatever date, because on the Power App, it's got spaces for the destination and the start date and the end date. Let me just switch to that real quick. That might be easier to look at. So this is my Power App in the Power Apps Desktop Studio, and I had created it just using the automatic creation, so it's really quite basic, where it just automatically created it from the SharePoint list, and it assumes that I wanted a browse screen and a data screen and an edit screen, which is normally the case. So I've got locations and title and description of my vacations that people want to take, and all that's going to come in then into the flow by using the Ask Power Apps button. And so then I have a condition, because based on whether or not the manager approves it will determine whether that vacation gets added to the vacation list in SharePoint. So my condition is based on the object name, which is the selected option, is coming from the approval email. Then I want it to say if that is equal to approve, then I'm going to send an email to the email address of the user, the requesting user, and I just have a basic subject, vacation approval, and that it was approved, good news, and creating an item in the SharePoint list. So I had to specify the site and the list, and then here's where I map all of the data coming out of the Power App into the SharePoint list, the different SharePoint list columns. So title, description, location, those are my SharePoint list columns, and then the purple values are the things coming from Power Apps. And if no, then I'm going to send a rejection email to the person and say that we're sorry, but your vacation to wherever was not approved. Does that all make sense so far?
Yeah, that's good. So one thing I would add on is, so when the email gets sent to, or the approval request gets sent to the manager, I'm assuming we could even put in something that says if other people within their department are going to be gone the same day or same week or whatever, so that the manager knows, oh well, if there's only 3 people in the department, only one person can be gone at that time.
That's a good point. Yeah, you probably could. I mean, you could add a department. Well, I mean, theoretically, they have a department in their AD, so you could use that. And
you could probably pull it from the SharePoint list.
Pulling the dates from the SharePoint list of the different people. Yeah, that's a good expansion.
Okay.
So let's go back for a minute to the Power App and then see, so what do you do with the Power App? This is just like a basic Power App that like I said, I automatically created it. And so all you have to do to connect that to the flow, I say all, but it takes a little bit of fiddling. But in this case, what I wanted to do, and again, this is pretty basic, you could have, different buttons probably that are more feature rich, but I just want to, when the user clicks the check mark here because they're adding a new vacation request, I want them to be able to I want it to not submit right to the list, which is what the default built-in behavior would have been, but instead I want the Power App, the flow to start. So to get it to do that, I would click on the check mark button, and go to the Action tab at the top and click on Flows to add flows to this app. And this is the thing that you can only do in the desktop studio. That's not available in the web version. And so it'll list, right now I already had associated this vacation approval flow with this Power App. I realize that print is kind of tiny, but the Power App client is. Or you could choose another flow. So you can create a new flow right from here too, but I have found it seems to make the most sense to me anyway, to create the flow first and have it available to me to choose from the flows that I want to associate with it.
Yeah, I think that that's right because I do the same thing with the connections where I create the connections so they're already stored so that when I go to create a new app, those connections are already exist so I don't have to go through all that
Yeah,
process.
right, right. And when you do that, so now I have this button already connected with this flow, then when I click on the button again, it shows me what it's looking for. So it automatically comes up with this vacation approval .run. It'll put that in and it'll, I don't want to, let me just make a new one so you can see. I think I can do that. If I insert a button, let's move it down here so we can see, and let's flow on it. Approval flow. And so you can see then, as soon as I clicked that, it came up in the top here with the prompting me for all the parameters that my flow said to ask Power Apps for. So every time I clicked Ask Power Apps over when I was creating my flow, it created these new variables. Then those are what the flow, the vacation approval.run function is looking for when somebody clicks this button. So I have to it lists them all here: send approval email underscore subject, send approval email underscore body, and body 1 and body 2 because I had put in, I wanted the location and the start date and the end date and so on. So then what you need to do though is put in corresponding Power Apps values for those. So going back to the one that I already did, if we look at that, then I've got employee input, which is what I had renamed the employee name text input box. Well, actually, it's a drop down, and so that's why, because it's a drop down, actually, I have to put employee input dot selected dot value because I'm selecting a person from the list of available users in my tenant. But for most of the other ones, I can just, or I think all the other ones, I can just put the name of the text input box, like location input, start input, end input, and so on. And so then those are mapping to the parameters as you see up above. And you can see sort of maybe based on, it colorizes it too, so you can see which values are coming from which cells, like you have in an Excel formula. And you can see up above it's got it in bold, so like I'm clicked right now on the start input. So, well, no, that's not really true. I thought it was going to bold that one that I was looking at, but it's not. Anyway, but you can see though how you can make sure that you've got the right number of parameters and so on. So then all those are going to get mapped to those parameters and go into the flow. So if we see how this works in action, if I play my Power App and say I want to add a new request, and I'm going to go to Croatia, because I am, and to Vis maybe, and which is Island Paradise from what I hear. Oops. And then who's going to go, and again, you could make this so that it's the current user, but I just didn't do that. So I'm going to say, let's make it Pliny instead, so that it puts in their email, because that's how the Office 365 users connection is going to figure out who their manager is and which user they are. You can't just use their name, although I tried. And the start date, let's just say here, and end date. And I didn't put in any kind of validation or anything. I mean, in real life, I'd want to, make sure that the end time is after the start time, and I'd probably want to remove the hours and minutes and things like that. But and so I'm going to click the Submit Item button. And so what should happen is that in let's see, my email, because I'm Pliny's manager. Yeah, so I got an email, approval request for Pliny's vacation. And so it says that he would like to go to Greece from these dates, and I can just either approve or reject. So if I click on approve, then I have approved. And then if I have Pliny's email brought up here, then he received an email saying that his vacation was approved. And if I go back to the vacation list in SharePoint, then that should be there if I refresh. And so, yeah, so now we've got him going to Croatia. And I don't, yeah, it's created by me because I was logged into the Power App, but, uh-oh, somehow it didn't get the employee. I didn't catch that yesterday. Sorry about that. Well, all right, I'll have to work on figuring that out. I think I must just have a parameter wrong. Apologies. But anyway, you get the, oh, and I see it's 2 o'clock, sorry. But that's pretty much it for me anyway, unless anybody has any questions. Does the email go into only an account, or it can go to Gmail? I'm trying to remember whether I've tested that. In this case, I'm using Office 365 users in that drop-down, so those are the only ones that are going to be available in the drop-down. But
yeah, my concern would be that I don't know if you'll get that approval reject capability within Gmail.
Right, I don't think you would probably. The manager wouldn't, right? Yeah, I think that's a special Office 365/Outlook thing. And in fact, yeah, the whole send the approval email, that's based on using Outlook.
Right. So you can still use Outlook, but use Gmail inside of Outlook, I guess.
Right.
But I'm like George right now. I don't use Outlook at all. I use Gmail for my company emails. So that would be a switch I would have to do.
Yeah. I mean, you can have a Gmail account as an Office 365 account. I'll do some testing with that and let you know, actually, because I have a Gmail account also, and
so I guess that can you forward it from the Office 365? Did the email into, say, Gmail? Can you use forwarding to get it to an account?
I'm sure you could, but I don't know that the functionality of the approve and oops, that wasn't what I meant to do. The functionality of the approve and reject probably wouldn't be there. What I was trying to do.
You could.
Sorry. Wrong buttons. Is
you could
in my
send the email with a notice that they would have to go back to their account
and once when I as soon as I hit that approve button, the content of the email actually changed to say action complete, so I can't really see, but whether there was a link to go to instead of pressing the approve and reject buttons, I'm not sure. in this new approval process that they're just in the process of coming out with, from what I understand, it creates an approval center which a manager can go to see and approve and reject things. So in that case, I don't see why it couldn't be to any email as long as they have an Office 365 account to get to this approval center. That would be the thing. But Gmail accounts can do that too, if it's if it's set up as being a Microsoft school or whatever they call that, school or work account.